Oh, my. Oh, my, yes. That's the barn where the thing happened that nobody talked about. I remember like it was yesterday. It was a hot day in July. I was at the butter churn when Mama came rushing in looking as white as a funeral sheet, like she'd seen a ghost. She just stood in the middle of the kitchen. Her hands had blood on them. There were little red rainbows of blood on her white apron. Mama looked at me and started to cry. Though I could tell she didn't want to, she just stood there like a statue and cried. Then Papa came rushing in looking real pale, like he'd seen the same ghost as Mama. He looked at me, his face went angry, and he took Mama onto the porch. I could hear him talking, but not their words. The way they stood made me scared. All I really heard was Papa say, "And we must never speak of this again." And they never did. Ever. After that, Uncle Wilbur never came around the farm no more. Nobody ever talked about that, either. Oh, my, yes. That's the barn where it happened. I remember like it was yesterday. Oh, my, yes.
Old barrel-ass Cruthers. You remember how he used to talk like he was horking up a lung all the time? Anyway, he said to me when my brother Carl and I was building the house, he said, "That's one fine chimney, Jim. After the boards of that old house crashed into the ground, those red bricks of yours will still be poking up out of the prairie like a hard-on." You ought to be proud of that chimney, Jim. You ought to be proud of that chimney, Jim.
The day they come to drill the well for the windmill is a day I will never forget. Cummy McCharles drilled the hole with his old Land's Dominion well drill that ran off a steam engine. It sounded like the end of the world and smelled about as bad. The engine put out steam and smoke. A bit of grass caught on fire from the driller, and we had to use buckets of trough water to put it out. Lucky for us, that's when Cummy hit water and shut the contraption down. Mama said Satan was operating the gears inside of that well driller. The water gurgled up right away. It was cold and sweet tasting. The next day, Mr. Levon came and builded the windmill. He was the first guy around here who builded those things, and it took him but one day to have water for us. We needed a few days to get used to having this tall thing in our lives, in our yard. No more priming, no more pumping. Us boys couldn't have been happier. I can see the windmill out of the bedroom window, and that first night it was full moon. Moonlight flashed between the wings of the windmill and danced like diamonds in the room. The windmill gave me two of its wings, and we flew together through the deep blue night with just the stars to guide us. We still do that when the moon is full. Sometimes I dream the house is surrounded by fields of sweet-smelling yellow flowers, but when I wake up, it's always the same old black dirt full of ruts and dung.
Is there any hope, Doctor?
He's a very sick boy, Mary. There isn't anything I can do for him. I'm sorry to have to tell you, but I think you and Liam need to prepare for the worst.
Oh, no. That'll be four I've lost. 3 born dead. And now Jericho, my firstborn. Ripped from my life.
Oh, Mary, for some unknown reason, life is cheap out here in the prairie. It comes and goes in a flash. Very often, too often, I just have to stand by and let the Lord do his work. That's all I can do for your boy, is stand by and pray. Please know, Mary, that you and your family will be in my prayers tonight. How are your other children feeling?
Two had a bit of a fever this morning, but the other two are just fine, thank the Lord.
Keep him as comfortable as you can. God be with you, Mary.
Thank you, Doctor.
I remember Papa and I standing after sundown and watching the red glow far off in the distance. I was scared, and I think Papa was a little scared too. The next night the glow was even closer. In the morning we could smell the smoke. Papa got the team out and plowed a wide circle around the house, the barn and haystacks. We filled everything we had with water. Barrels, troughs, pots, pans, kettles, pails, basins, jars, even the chamber pots. We soaked brooms, grain sacks, sheets, and anything we could find that sopped up water and could be used to beat back the fire. My big brother Ivan pumped water so long that day his arms was swollen sore by evening. After dark, we all stood and watched a fire coming straight toward our farm. The prairie grass was so high, fire ate it like it was breakfast. I can still hear the loud roar of the fire. We was lucky. Just when we started to beat at the flames, the wind changed direction. It sent the fire across the ravine away from us. Burned out half our wheat crop, though. The other thing the fire took was the outhouse. It was tinder dry, and it took but one spark to set it on fire. It was gone in no time. Mama and us kids talked Papa into digging the new outhouse closer to the house. Mama had to tickle him to get him to agree. When we was looking for things to fill with water, we even used the pretty teacups Mama brought over with her on the boat. There was only 2 of them, and one got broke. Mama cried.
I bought that Chevy half-ton from Steve Tward, and me and Mary had just got hitched and we needed solid farm transportation. That Chev was a fine piece of truck, and people noticed me when I drove it to Marshallville, back when it was shiny and new. And I was shiny and new. Luke, our firstborn, was conceived in that truck. It was a hot day in late August, and me and Mary were driving home from seeing her parents about an hour away. We stopped for a pee by the road when a prairie storm came up with thunder and lightning. It rained hammers and nails. We couldn't see to drive, so we had wild sex in that steamed-up truck by the side of the road. The next May, when Mary went to labor, she woke me at 3 a.m. We got 2/3 of the way to the hospital in town, and she gave birth. Right into the tote bag she had her clothes in. Luke just slid right out of her and into the bag. So he was born in that truck too. 17 years later, on an August night, Luke drove the truck into a soft embankment, uprooting a tree which came through the side window, impaling his head. He died in the truck, quivering at the end of a broken branch. I leave Luke's truck up there to remind me, and the sky, what happened. He'd have been 50 years old today.
Well, old friend, looks like we got through another summer without having to do a speck of work. How about that?
How many summers is it that we haven't worked?
I lost track, but I'm still tired. Sure is good not to have to pull a plow anymore.
You like just rusting away up here with this great view of the prairie and the highway, don't you, old tugger?
I do. I love it. My tugging days are long over. I pulled everybody and everything back and forth across hot, dusty fields and down skinny little roads through the bush. I pushed snow away so everyone could move again. I pulled plows, harrows, wagons, stone boats, binders, horses, and wagons out of the mires. Big blocks of ice from the slough for the ice box. I haven't pulled you a time or two, old pressure pal.
You did, and you were strong and eager. Then they bought the big horse, as they called it. You tugged other stuff after that. The big horse did most of my pulling. I mostly just sat there and let my gears tickle me once I was in action. But you were a strong tugger, my friend.
I had some fine metal days, didn't I?
That you did.
You had your share of heroic days in the field, too.
Those times in late summer, when the heat was still on the land and the crop came in early, those days, driven by more horsepower than I needed, surrounded, serviced, and fed by dozens of broad, sweating men, each trying to precisely match my abilities to reap, to separate the seed from the stalk, the gold from the grip, and deliver it en masse into a hopper, the rich harvest bestowed. I yearned all year for those weeks of thrilling work, the rhythmic whine of the belt from the power takeoff of the big horse, playing counterpoint to the chugging beat of my cogs, gears, and pulleys, the dry shouts of the men feeding me the harvest, the erotic embrace of virgin grain against polished metal. That was my moment. My bliss.
So that's what you've been ruminating about. You are a poet.
I am. I am the cutting edge of rusty and irrelevant farm machinery poetry, which is rapidly taking over from cowboy poetry as the true voice of the prairie wind. Would you like to hear more?
I very much would, and hopefully shall.
Indeed, you shall. That small sound we both know so well. It is the creep and peel of the rust. The rust. The rust, it rules us now, day and night, through every season, subtle but unstoppable against the breeze and the dawn. The rust is omnipresent, like God, etching away at us. We flake into the gray fall grass, shatterings of us glint on cold snow and are buried, only to glint again in spring turnings. We are the hilltop beasts of burden, brazen against the whip of the northerlies in January, snapping in the August heat like brittle, controlled insects. And always, always the shedding rust, speaking in its wee, timorous voice.
I can hear the rust right now, and I'm still tired.
Out here, most of the world is sky, with just a little strip of land running around the bottom. Sometimes that little bit of land isn't enough, especially when the sky... Tilly Sweet lived in this house. Ah, me. Tilly came from the big city of London, England, where there is more land than sky. Just off the boat, she married Williker Sweet. People round here called them Tilly and Willie. Anyways, Willie moved her out here to the middle of the big sky. The biggest sky she ever saw. Tilly Sweet had never experienced anything so big, so blue, so unforgiving, so overpowering as the prairie sky. It became her prison, but one she eventually escaped. It was during her second summer out here when the isolation, The homesickness and the desperation of her daily life overtook Tilly. It sent her running and running and running and running across the open prairie. She was running from the sky, trying to escape it. She ran and ran until her lungs burst and she fell face down in a clover pasture, never to arise. When they found her, she was smiling. Ah, me. It's happened before. I know for truth it has happened before. The night Tilly died, a thunderstorm came through here and lightning struck the big old cottonwood tree that grew by the sweet house. Some say lightning struck it 3 times that night. In the morning, all that was left was a jagged stump with a sharp tip, like a finger, pointing toward heaven. Ah, me.
Greetings. I'm Angus Marshall. I wanted that whole quarter section of land at the end of that lovely blue lake. But Aubrey Briers, a farmhand from Ontario, just like me, was squatting on it. Just like I was. Off in one quarter, Briers built a lopsided sod hut and looked about to be tumbling over any minute. I don't know how long he'd been there, but I was keen to find a way of getting rid of him so I could build my little dream. What was my little dream? Well, before me stretches to the south a narrow, shallow lake, 5 miles long. A little stream comes in from the north and feeds the lake. The land around rolls in gentle fashion, rich for farming. I feel in my Scottish bones a town will grow on this very spot. One evening, when I was sitting under a cottonwood tree, watching the sun reflected off the lake, the shimmer of light and water sent a vision afoot over the landscape. Suddenly, around me I saw little houses, churches, hotels, and stores built along the railroad track. People scurrying about, building and doing, building and doing. I saw yet unborn Marshalls, my sons and daughters, walking on this land, growing and building here too, and sharing, always sharing. For if the good Lord teaches us anything, he teaches us that there's enough. Sitting under that old tree, I suddenly heard a sound from the future. The wet, lonesome whistle of a steam train in the distance. It would be 11 years before the track was laid through here, but I heard that train coming just as plain as day. I knew at that moment a town would arise here. That was my dream. But Briers was in the way. I needed to get rid of him. He didn't know me very well. I liked it that way. So I came up with a plan. I waited until the next starless night, dark as a dungeon. I had an old horse collar with a couple of cracked bells that sounded eerie. So I put the horse collar around my neck and went to visit Briars. When I got to his hut, the thought occurred to me to just push the precarious pile of mud over and smother him. But I didn't need to resort to murder to get what I wanted. I started to howl like a wolf, which got Briar's attention. When he came out of his hut, I introduced myself as Satan and asked if I could be of any service to him since he was squatting on Satan's land. I transformed into a horse and snorted and neighed and whinnied, pawed the ground, telling him I lost my wagon a few miles back and would he help me fetch it? And so on. Mad gibberish. Briars didn't know how to react, so he went inside his hut. I could hear him securing his door. As I left, I shouted I'd be back every night to see if he needed anything from Satan. It rained hard that night. Next morning, when I stepped out of my little hut, I saw a different landscape. No longer did Briar's hovel stand out against the raw horizon. In its stead lay a pile of mud. I rushed over, thinking the hut had finally fallen onto Briars and smothered him. But a thorough dig among the muck revealed no Briars, or anything for that matter. I never saw hide nor hair of him again. He had vanished, gone as gone can get. I claimed that whole quarter, and the rest of the section too. That's why this town is called Marshallville, not Briarsville. That's also why the war memorial in town has a monument that looks just like Reginald, my firstborn, who was gassed at Ypres in 1915. People call the monument the Unknown Soldier. But I know who it is. I know who it is.
I don't like trains. Never have. I was born on a train, but it was a rude and crude way to come into the world. It surely was. It was 1893, and even though Mama was round and ripe with me, she was traveling up to Russell to see her ailing brother Thomas. The train was 1.5 miles out of the little town of Marshallville, and Mama had a big bathroom urge. To her dismay, her water burst, and she squirted me out like a bar of wet soap. In those days, when you used train toilets, your leavings went right out onto the tracks. Well, I landed under the train with the cord connected to me and Mama still attached. I was dragged along under the train over the cinders until the cord got broken. I was cut up pretty bad and bear the scars to prove it. This red gash on my forehead below my right eye, that's my tattoo from being dragged face down till the cord broke. My whole right side and my back looks like a road map from being cut up by sharp cinders. The doctor in Marshallville, his name was Doc Wenzel. He heard about my desperate birth. The doc got in his horse and buggy and hightailed it to the train. Doc Wenzel staunched up my bleeding the best he could, tended to Mama, and made the train engineer agree to keep the train stopped for an hour. That way, me and Mama could get over the shocks of the day in a warm car before he took us to the little hospital in Marshallville. If I'm very quiet, I can still feel the first warm hands that held me. A conductor named Gus lifted me off the cinders and placed me in a linen tablecloth from the dining car. I was bloodied and bleeding. He dried me off, and I can remember feeling the heat from his big, warm hands. Well, that was what the first minutes of my life were like. Luckily, life got better. Mama told me all this, and ever since, I've had a great story to tell that always begins with, I don't like trains. Never have.
Cribbin McHugh froze to death. He lived in this house in Marshallville his whole life and cared for his aging and ailing mother, Ruthie. It was late fall in the early 50s when he fell through the thin ice on the river. Cribbs, as everybody called him, managed to get to shore. Dripping wet, the temperature well below zero, with a stiff wind, he started for home, but soon got discombobulated. I guess he staggered around for a while, but the cold overwhelmed him. When they found Cribbs, he was naked as the day he was born. Rumors went around that he'd been beaten, robbed, and stripped. But he died alone, in the cold, his body wedged up between two big old cottonwood trees. People don't know. Freezing to death is one of the worst ways to die. Slowly losing your heat, your essential fire gradually dimming, then gone. It isn't long before the cold starts to interfere with your ability to think rationally, to understand what is happening to you. Your confusion mounts. Your movement is impeded by the cold. The awful, unforgiving cold. You shiver violently, uncontrollably. You stumble around. Your hands are useless. People don't know. The constant cold induces some odd behavior, like wanting to burrow under something, behind something, between something, like big trees. It's similar to hibernation. When the metabolism slows down, we begin to burrow, to dig in, like varmints. Somewhere late in the freezing to death process, a strange thing occurs. You suddenly feel hot, unbearably hot. Unable to reason why this might be happening, you feel confined. Your clothing imprisons you in the heat, so you tear off your clothes, compulsively stripping every shred off your body to cool down. Naked, you can only feel the dimly heated core of your body as your vitals collapse under duress. Your arms and legs turn blue and numb. Your skin turns brittle. Your eyes freeze shut. Your lips and tongue harden. Your blood slows as it becomes ice in your veins. Your organs succumb to the cold, and there's a constant high-pitched buzzing in your ears because your eardrums have frozen and broken apart. When the buzzing stops, so does everything else. You are extinguished. Your body becomes stiff, solid, like one stuff. All ice and frozen bone. That's how Cribbin McHugh died. People don't know.
I blew it. I truly blew it. In 1960, Marshallville became a town with water. As mayor at the time, I'm proud to say I was instrumental in getting the waterworks to town. No more outhouses and public taps. No more hauling buckets of water in and toilet pails out. Soon everything would be up to date. Hot and cold running, flushing and showering. That summer, streets and yards were torn up all over town as the infrastructure for water and sewer went in. And then, in early October, most of the town showed up for a ceremony to celebrate the arrival of the waterworks. New towns with water usually hold a subdued ceremony with a symbolic burning of an outhouse to signal the end of the old, well-worn path out back and the beginning of a bright, sanitary, indoor future. Never a town to do anything in a small way, the council and myself voted on burning all the biffies in town at once. There was one dissenting voice. Mark Robbins. He's now the mayor. Anyway, 171 outhouses were piled on the flats over at the north end of the lake, hauled and stacked by Dreger's huff. The bottom openings, which once shielded holes filled with human muck, now gaped obscenely and odorously in plain view. Not the most pleasant sight as you drove into town. The local paper asked me for a comment about the forthcoming celebration, and my exact words still echo through my memory. It will make a fine blaze and leave an indelible impression. People will remember this night. At the ceremony, I gave a brief speech. Dr. Galt, in his British accent, remarked how a new era in our ability to fight disease and improve personal hygiene was beginning. I turned on a giant red tap. The water flowed in. The waste flowed out. It was a miracle. The 20th century had arrived. Everyone cheered. Then Fire Chief Burley lit the outhouses. More cheers as our paths went up in smoke, cutting a swath of light, heat, and stink through the cold October twilight. It was a fine blaze, enjoyed on many levels, but the outhouses had their revenge. That night, and for 3 days and nights afterwards, every nose in Marshallville knew we had the waterworks by a constant reminder. An acrid, burning manure smell that arose from the smoldering heap of collapsed outhouses. The smell resisted arduous spraying from the town's fire truck and produced a rank odor that permeated the whole town, no matter which direction the wind blew. It was awful. Some older people even went to the hospital for oxygen and relief. In the aftermath, I bore the brunt of coffee shop condemnation. I couldn't even go for a java at Jim Jim's without being taunted, often not good-naturedly. But I was the one who said it would be a night to remember, and it stuck. Unable to claim the waterworks as my victory because of the blowback from the bad idea fire, I was soundly defeated the following year. Marshallville had flushed me. Even to this day, every time I flush the toilet, I can smell the stink from the burning outhouses. Apparently, this still happens to other people in Marshallville, too.
Lil? Can that be you?
I guess it pretty much has to be, don't it? How are you, Dort?
Great geezers! Nobody's called me Dort in years.
Probably about as long since I heard anybody say great geezers.
I'm doing fine, old gal. George and I are in town to visit his sis Ethel, who's not doing so well.
So I hear. How is George?
The same. Still loves to haunt musty old places. He dragged me into the museum downtown, which I'd never been in before. Lo and behold, there was our old switchboard from the telephone office. You could have knocked me over with a noodle.
That old clutter bucket's been in there for a few years since somebody discovered it in the loft of old Smoocher's barn. You should drive down Larch. The old telephone building is still there.
We will. Old Smoocher. Great geezers. His number was on the Central Party line, 23 ring 3.
Very good, Dort. Your memory's held up well considering we haven't worked the board for over 30 years.
When I saw that old switchboard, it all just came flooding back to me, Lil. The names, the numbers, the rings, the long-distance codes. Even the smell of the marigolds Juicy Jim, the janitor, used to plant around the building. Funny what you remember.
And what you forget.
Remember, Lil, we used to have the best gossip in town, didn't we?
Always the best. If you wanted to know who was pregnant and shouldn't have been, ask Lil or Dort. If you wanted to know whose business was about to go tits up, ask the phone gals. If you wanted to find out who gambled or drank too much, which men liked boys better than girls and vice versa, who really stole the church statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary, ask the busiest bodies in town.
It was quite a burden bearing all that knowledge, wasn't it, Lil?
That's how I found out my Dutch was cheating on me. And with who? You look surprised, Dort.
You knew?
Of course.
You knew? All along?
All along. It wasn't long before half the town knew.
No! What? No!
You two weren't very good at having an affair. Not very good at all. You lacked, basic discretion. You thought people were stupider than they are, which always backfires in a small town.
Did Dutch know that you knew?
Nope, and that's just how I wanted it. See what I mean about being lousy at cheating? George and I were much better at having our affair than you two.
What? You and my George had an affair? I don't believe you.
You don't have to believe me, honey. It happened and we had a hoot because nobody, and I mean nobody, knew about us. Making sure of that was the most fun. Well, some of the fun.
I don't believe you.
You believe what you need to believe, Dort. Ask George.
I will. George? George!
God, I've waited a long time for that. I feel great. And she had old Smoocher's number wrong. Ha!
I used to stand in that big showroom window and wonder where all the customers were. People drove by, but not many stopped in. Cassie, my wife, took care of the storefront and the books, and I did the repair work in the garage in the back. We were a good team. At least that's what I thought. One Saturday night, when Cassie was visiting her sister in the city, my old buddy Hutch and I were watching the game. Between periods, I was telling Hutch about how poorly the garage was doing and how confused I was about why it wasn't doing better. I guess that people in Marshallville didn't think I was a very good mechanic. And maybe I needed to find another line of work.
It's not you.
What do you mean, Hutch?
It's not your work that's causing your business to fail.
Really? What is it then?
It's your wife.
Cassie? What do you mean?
Cassie, exactly. To be blunt with you, my friend, people don't like her. She came from the city, and though you and she may not think so, she looks down on people here. At least, that's the impression she leaves. She's not small-town stuff. She's from elsewhere. A square peg.
People treat me just fine. Treat us just fine.
They're just being polite. How many times you two been invited over to anybody's house but mine for dinner? I'm guessing none. How often do you both go out to events in town? Almost never. People don't see you anywhere but at the garage. You need to circulate, participate in the life of the town.
Cassie doesn't like those kind of... As I got us both another beer, it was beginning to sink in. But Hutch wasn't done yet.
Do you want me to believe that you moved to the city for a few years and forgot how people around here think? What their expectations are? You come from here. It's in your blood, but you forgot. Love made you blind to what's going on around you, and to what's always been going on here. It's the same old story in this town. Nothing has changed. Nothing ever will.
So, I am a good mechanic?
People think so. I know so. It's your situation that keeps you from succeeding here. You're the rose and Cassie is the thorn. You cancel each other out in this town.
When Cassie got back from the city, we discussed our situation. A month later, I started a real estate course. Something I thought I'd be good at, and I was. We moved to the city and had a happy and prosperous life together. I left that little town knowing I was a good mechanic. But I never did tell Cassie what Hutch said. I still feel enormous gratitude to my old friend for giving me the perspective I needed at exactly the right moment. Sometimes friends save your life and don't even know it.
Huh? Huh? What's that?
It sounds like the crossing bell.
The crossing bell? There hasn't been a bell there for decades. There hasn't even been tracks here for 20 years. But you're right.
It's a train. It is a train.
But it can't be.
That was fun.
I still don't believe it. We must be dreaming.
Maybe.